The elevator ascended 38 stories without a sound, not even a whisper. I silently counted the seconds. 42 to reach the penthouse. The doors parted to reveal a solitary receptionist stationed at a glass desk. The sprawling Los Angeles skyline formed a backdrop behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Mr. Wilson is expecting you, Mr. Rodriguez." She didn't bother to glance up from her screen. "Last door on the right." I proceeded down a hallway adorned with abstract art pieces, each likely worth more than my entire year's earnings. The sound of my boots against the polished concrete floor was the only sound. The stark contrast between my worn field jacket and this sterile environment was not lost on me. The door stood ajar. Spencer Wilson sat behind a desk fashioned from a single massive slab of wood, his fingers steepled in front of him, observing my entrance. A man accustomed to being the most important person in any setting. I'd encountered his kind before, those who bought their way into danger, then paid others to extract them. James Rodriguez. He remained seated, punctual. I appreciate that. I settled into the chair across from him, noting its subtly calculated discomfort, slightly lower than his, angled to catch the harsh morning light. A clear display of power dynamics. I subtly shifted it a couple of inches to the left before sitting. "Your message referenced an expedition." I kept my tone neutral and substantial compensation. Wilson gave a curt nod, then tapped something on the glass surface of his desk. A three-dimensional topographic map materialized between us, projected from concealed lenses. An island, roughly 8 miles across at its widest point. Dense jungle blanketed most of the interior, with a volcanic peak rising from the center. The coastline was a mix of sheer cliffs and curving beaches. "This is Yasur Island." Wilson's hand passed through the projection, rotating it. "Located approximately 300 miles northeast of Fiji. Technically unclaimed territory." I studied the projection intently. Volcanic, dormant for at least 4 centuries, according to geological surveys. He enlarged the image. "What interests me is that it remains completely uninhabited and largely unexplored. Let's say I have investors interested in potential development opportunities, pending verification that the island doesn't contain any protected species or archaeological sites that would prevent private acquisition." That explanation aligned more with reality. Resort development, luxury getaways for the ultra-wealthy. The research team provided a veneer of plausible deniability if environmental groups started asking inconvenient questions. "Tell me about the team composition." Wilson tapped his desk again. The island vanished, replaced by personnel files that floated between us. 2 scientists specializing in botany and marine biology. An anthropologist to document any cultural artifacts. A geologist to assess stability and resource potential. 2 security contractors with military backgrounds. All experienced professionals who signed comprehensive confidentiality agreements. I studied each file briefly, advanced degrees, field experience, equipment lists indicative of serious research capabilities, transport, and extraction. My private jet to Fiji. From there, a seaplane to the island, which you'll pilot. The plane remains moored at the island for immediate extraction if necessary. Satellite phones, emergency beacons, and twice-daily check-ins with my operations center. I nodded slowly, processing the information. The setup was meticulous, which only amplified my suspicion about what Wilson wasn't revealing. Local authorities fully informed of our research expedition? Permits secured? Wilson dismissed the projection with a swipe. "I should mention that this offer expires when you leave this room." I have 3 other candidates with similar qualifications. A standard negotiation tactic, but effective nonetheless. I studied his face, searching for tells. His expression remained placid, controlled. When would this expedition begin? Tomorrow morning, 7:30 departure from my private airfield in Santa Monica. The timeline was deliberately accelerated, designed to minimize second-guessing and independent investigation. A red flag, but not necessarily a deal-breaker. I'll need equipment allowances, my own gear already accounted for. 200-pound personal equipment allocation, additional $50,000 advance. As I rode the silent elevator back to the lobby, I mentally cataloged the gear I need to purchase and what I already possessed. The contract felt heavy in my inside pocket. $5 million for 2 weeks on an uninhabited island. Nothing was ever that simple or lucrative without complications. But I'd navigate those when they surfaced. I always did. I arrived at the private airfield at 6. He indicated the 2 security men. Thomas Miller, Scott Davis, tactical support. I nodded to each of them. Emily Johnson stepped forward first, extending her hand. Mid-30s, practical field clothes already worn at the knees and elbows. Hair pulled back tight, glasses that looked like they could withstand a beating. Her handshake was firm, direct. Heard about your extraction work in the Colombian rainforest, she said. 8 researchers, flash flooding, impressive navigation. I hadn't anticipated that reference. Different scenario, different risks. Always is. She studied my face, assessing my experience. She carried herself with the controlled posture of someone accustomed to balancing on boat decks. Her handshake was brief, professional. Marine samples are my priority, she said. Particularly interested in the coral formations visible in the satellite imagery. They show unusual structural patterns. Robert Brown remained where he stood, arms still crossed. I approached him instead. Close-cropped gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, and a build that suggested previous physical strength now softening with age. His handshake was perfunctory. You seem less enthusiastic than the others, I said. I go where the money is. His voice had the gravelly quality of someone who'd breathed too much mineral dust. $5 million buys a lot of enthusiasm, even for an island the locals won't touch. Then why the tension? He glanced at Wilson, who had moved away to speak with the pilot. 25 years of field work teaches you when something doesn't add up. Wilson's spending $50 million minimum on this expedition. For what? Pharmaceutical prospects that might pan out in 10 years? Resort development on an island indigenous people avoid? He shook his head. There's something he's not telling us. I filed that observation away, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. What's your geological focus? Mineral composition, water table mapping, stability assessment. He gestured towards several hard cases being loaded. Ground-penetrating radar, core sampling equipment, standard survey package. The security contractors approached next, moving with the synchronized awareness of men who'd worked together before. Thomas Miller, the taller one, had the hyper-vigilant eye movements I recognized from forward deployment zones. Scott Davis had the compact build and steady hands of someone comfortable with weapons systems. Afghanistan or Iraq? I asked, noting the particular callous pattern on Miller's right hand. Both Miller answered, plus 5 years private sector, Sudan, Venezuela, Indonesian mining operations. Davis nodded. We handled security for 3 of Wilson's previous expeditions, Thailand, Ecuador, northern Russia. I checked their equipment. Custom-modified AR platforms, sidearms, tactical vests with ceramic plates. Standard private security loadout, though the quantities suggested preparation for significant threats rather than routine precaution. Rules of engagement? I asked. Defensive only, Davis said. Wildlife deterrence, perimeter security. We're not anticipating human threats on an uninhabited island. Everything's cleared with local authorities, Miller added. Full documentation for the weapons transit. Wilson returned, checking his watch again. Wheels up in 15. Rodriguez, verify the equipment manifest and sign off. Everyone else board now. The team dispersed toward the plane while I followed a ground crew member to inspect the cargo. 12 large equipment cases contained the scientific instruments, mass spectrometers, portable DNA sequencers, ground-penetrating radar. 8 waterproof containers held camping gear, water purification systems, and medical supplies. 4 hard cases carried the security equipment. My own gear looked modest by comparison. The customs official handed me a clipboard with a manifest. I checked each item against what I'd seen loaded, noting weights and dimensions, then signed the bottom. Procedure before departure always. Wilson approached as I finished. Everything satisfactory? Equipment looks comprehensive. I handed back the clipboard. Somewhat excessive for a 2-week survey. I prefer thoroughness. His tone made clear the topic wasn't open for discussion. The seaplane is already in Fiji. Cessna Caravan on amphibious floats. Should accommodate all essential equipment for the second leg. I boarded the jet last, noting how the team had arranged themselves. Emily and Sarah sat together, comparing notes on tablets. David had spread botanical reference materials across his table. Robert sat alone, staring out a window. The security contractors occupied the rear seats, equipment between them. Wilson took a single seat near the front, already engrossed in his phone. I stored my bag and took an empty seat with sight lines to everyone. The engine spooled up, and the safety briefing played automatically on cabin screens. No flight attendants, just the cockpit crew behind a closed door. As we taxied, Emily moved to sit across from me. "You've got questions," she said. It wasn't a question about the island. "Several about us." She gestured toward the team. "You're evaluating whether we'll be liabilities in the field." I didn't deny it. Standard procedure for expedition leadership. She nodded. "I've done 17 field expeditions, including 3 to remote Pacific islands, published work on cultural migration patterns across Oceania. My father was an anthropologist who specialized in indigenous knowledge systems." She hesitated before switching to administrative work. "I know how to conduct myself in challenging environments." Your interest in this particular island, a complete absence of human habitation despite its habitability. Islands with fresh water, abundant food sources, and strategic positions are never left empty in the Pacific. Not for thousands of years of human migration. She lowered her voice, and the Ami avoidance suggests cultural significance that contradicts typical settlement patterns. That's worth investigating. The plane reached cruising altitude. David moved to join our conversation, bringing a tablet filled with plant diagrams. "The botanical potential is extraordinary," he said, showing me satellite imagery with vegetation zones highlighted. "This northwestern section shows color variations consistent with unique alkaloid-producing species, and these coastal formations could be mangrove relatives with novel chemical properties." His enthusiasm seemed genuine, if excessive. Sarah remained in her seat, methodically organizing waterproof notebooks. Robert stared at the ceiling. Apparently lost in thought, The security team checked their phones one last time before service would cut out over the Pacific. Wilson remained isolated, typing rapidly on his laptop. Whatever drove him to spend $50 million on this expedition, he clearly didn't feel the need to socialize with those implementing it. 8 hours into the flight, somewhere over the Pacific, the dynamics had settled. David talked almost constantly about botanical discovery potential, pausing only when Emily steered the conversation toward cultural context. Sarah contributed precise observations about marine ecosystems, but avoided personal topics. Robert said little, reviewing geological surveys with a furrowed brow. I used the galley prep area to make coffee, and Thomas joined me. "What's your read on Wilson?" he asked quietly, glancing toward the front where our employer remained absorbed in his work. "Professional, driven, not forthcoming." Thomas nodded. "This is our third job for him. First two were straightforward. Security for resource surveys. This one," he shrugged. "Different vibe, more equipment, more secrecy, bigger paycheck." "You worried?" Cautious. He measured creamer into his cup with precision. "Wilson quadrupled our usual rate, told us to prepare for unusual wildlife encounters without elaborating. Wouldn't let us contract additional personnel." "What kind of wildlife are you expecting?" "Nothing specific in the briefing materials, just potentially aggressive indigenous species." He sipped his coffee. "Could be wild cats, could be Komodo dragons, could be nothing. But when someone pays this much, they're expecting something." I returned to my seat with that information filed away. The plane began its descent toward Fiji as evening approached. Through the windows, the scattered islands of the archipelago appeared as dark shapes against the deepening blue of the Pacific. Emily sat beside me during landing. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked. "Feel what?" "The gaps. The missing pieces." She gestured toward Wilson. "He's not telling us everything. The Ami don't avoid the island because of dangerous animals or bad weather. It's something else." I didn't confirm or deny her suspicion. "We'll learn more on the ground." She studied my face. "You're very controlled, James. I'm guessing military does that. Teaches you to compartmentalize. Observe without revealing. It's useful until it isn't." She glanced at the others. "Everyone here has professional reasons for coming, but 50 million suggests more than academic interest." She paused. "I wonder what Wilson really wants from Yasur Island." The wheels touched down on the Fiji runway with a gentle bump. As the plane taxied toward the private terminal, I watched each team member prepare for disembarkation. The small, unconscious habits that revealed character. David packed his materials with surprising care. Sarah checked her equipment list 3 times. Robert moved stiffly, wincing as he stood. The security team was first on their feet, automatically positioning themselves near the exit. Wilson finally closed his laptop. We refuel and transfer equipment to the seaplane. Departure at dawn. The meteorological forecast for Yasur shows clear conditions for the next 72 hours. As the cabin door opened, warm, humid air rushed in. The scent of salt water and tropical vegetation replaced the sterile atmosphere of the plane. Something about that moment, the threshold between a controlled environment and the raw natural world, triggered a sensation I'd learned to respect over years of fieldwork. Unease. Not fear, not concern, just the quiet recognition that we were moving into something unknown. I'd felt it before dangerous missions, before unexpected complications. The atmospheric pressure before a storm, the unnatural silence before an attack. Nothing specific I could identify or report, just a feeling that crawled across the back of my neck. "You feel it too," Emily said quietly. Not a question. I followed the team down the stairs, watching them fan out across the tarmac, already focusing on their specialized tasks. Whatever Wilson's true motivation, whatever secrets Yasur Island held, we were committed now. Dawn would take us to our destination. I just hoped we were prepared for what we'd find. The Cessna Caravan floated 20 yards from Fiji's private airstrip, tethered to a weather dock that creaked with each minor swell. Its amphibious floats gleamed in the morning light. I'd flown similar models during extraction operations in the Philippines, reliable workhorses that forgave minor errors and handled rough water better than they had any right to. I circled the aircraft twice, checking control surfaces and inspecting the hull for damage. The pre-flight checklist took 17 minutes. Thomas and Scott helped transfer our equipment from the transport vehicles, measuring each case against the seaplane's cargo capacity. We need to leave behind some of the redundant gear. Weight limitations. Robert asked, watching me calculate figures on a clipboard. 2,200 pounds maximum, including personnel. I tapped the manifest. We're over by 400. Emily approached, already having anticipated this problem. I marked priority equipment with green tags. Everything with yellow can wait for a second trip if necessary. I shook my head. There won't be a second trip. We make weight, or we reconfigure. Wilson arrived last, stepping from an air-conditioned SUV with a satellite phone in hand. He surveyed our loading operation with barely concealed impatience. "Weather window is optimal today," he said, checking his watch. "The forecast shows potential systems developing in 36 hours. David clutched a case of sample containers to his chest. "These are non-negotiable, custom gas chromatography equipment." I made the necessary adjustments to the manifest, cutting where possible. We eliminated backup camping gear, reduced water reserves since the island reportedly had freshwater streams, and left behind one of the radar units. Thomas and Scott consolidated ammunition into a single case. The loading took 43 minutes. I assigned seats based on weight distribution, putting Sarah and Emily toward the front, Robert and David in the middle, and the security team at the rear where their heavier frames would balance the equipment load. Wilson wasn't coming. He'd monitor from Fiji and coordinate with his corporate center. Daily check-ins at 0700 1900, Wilson reminded me, handing over the satellite phone. Emergency protocols is outlined in Section 8. The extraction timeline remains flexible based on your findings. His handshake was perfunctory. He'd already mentally moved on to whatever business occupied the remainder of his schedule. The caravan's engine turned over smoothly. Instruments showed normal readings across the board. I taxied away from the dock, feeling the familiar resistance of water against the floats. The seaplane gathered speed across the glassy surface, then lifted free, climbing toward 3,000 feet. Emily sat in the co-pilot's seat. A topographical map was spread across her knees. Heading 275, she confirmed, comparing our course with her GPS tablet. 3 hours of endless blue stretched before us. The ocean rippled far below, occasionally broken by the white wake of a fishing vessel or cargo ship. Conversation behind me dwindled as each team member retreated into preparation. David flipped through botanical reference materials, muttering occasionally about potential endemic species differentiation. Sarah studied marine migration patterns on her tablet. Robert slept, his head propped against the window. The security team performed equipment checks, methodically inspecting each piece of gear before repacking it. 2 hours and 17 minutes into the flight, Emily tapped my arm and pointed ahead. First visual. Yasur Island materialized on the horizon, a jagged green teardrop rising from the Pacific. The volcanic peak stood approximately 2,000 feet above sea level, its slopes covered in dense vegetation that ran nearly to the water's edge. White sand beaches wrapped the southern and eastern sides, while sheer cliffs dominated the northern face. "Looks exactly like the projection," I said. Emily frowned, making notes. Unusual lack of coastal development. Most Pacific islands show some evidence of human presence. Fishing camps, temporary structures, boat landings. As we descended to 1,200 feet for a closer look, something shifted in my perception. The island was objectively beautiful, vibrant greens against turquoise waters, perfect beaches untouched by footprints. But something felt wrong. Not dangerous necessarily, just wrong. I'd experienced similar sensations before, usually before ambushes or natural disasters. The atmospheric pressure before a storm, the unnatural silence before an attack. Nothing specific I could identify or report, just a feeling that crawled across the back of my neck. "You feel it too," Emily said quietly. Not a question. I circled the island once, noting potential landing sites. The western lagoon offered the calmest water and closest access to the beach. I began the approach, watching for submerged obstacles or unexpected currents. "Everyone secure your equipment," I called back. Landing in 3 minutes. The caravan settled onto the lagoon's surface with minimal resistance. I cut the engine to idle and let momentum carry us toward the beach. The water was remarkably clear. I could see white sand 15 feet below, unmarked by anchor scars or debris. "We made it," David said, his excitement breaking the silence. "Untouched botanical paradise. Look at those tree lines. Completely undisturbed canopy structure." I steered the plane parallel, approaching the shore, settling about 30 yards offshore. The water was a consistent 8 feet deep, which was ideal, shallow enough for easy unloading, yet deep enough to keep. Her methodical documentation stood in stark contrast to David's barely contained excitement as he hovered at the jungle's edge, cataloging the visible plant species. "James," Sarah called from where she knelt at the waterline. "Come take a look at this." I joined her, noting the unusual clarity of the water. She pointed to the sand beneath the gentle waves. "No shells," she said. "No crustacean remains. No seaweed deposits." I scanned the beach in both directions. "Could be the current patterns." She shook her head. "Even the most isolated beaches show some evidence of marine life cycles. This is—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Sterile." Robert joined us, notebook in hand. Same observation on land. No insect activity in the sand. No evidence of burrowing. David called from the jungle, pointing to the dense vegetation. "There's plenty of life in the jungle. Complex ecosystem structure, multiple canopy layers." I made a note to establish baseline environmental readings before nightfall. Whatever scientific anomalies existed, we needed documentation rather than speculation. By mid-afternoon, we'd established a perimeter. Thomas and Scott set up motion sensors at 20-yard intervals along the tree line. The tents formed a semicircle facing the water, with a command center, a reinforced canopy housing communications equipment, positioned centrally. "Radio check," I set into the handheld unit. 5 confirmations came back immediately, each team member reporting their position and status. Thomas approached, wiping sweat from his forehead. Perimeter is secure. No signs of large wildlife or human presence. Motion detectors active. Generator? I asked. Operational. Solar backup charging. Fuel reserves for 14 days at current consumption rates. I nodded, making a note on my clipboard. Mandatory equipment check at 1800. First communication window with base at 1900. The day passed in the structured routine of camp establishment. Water purification systems were tested with samples from both the ocean and a small stream that emerged from the jungle 200 yards to the north. Food supplies were inventoried and stored in animal-proof containers. Medical kits were positioned in each tent and in the command center. As afternoon shifted toward evening, I noticed something that had been bothering me since our arrival: the silence. Tropical environments typically hummed with insect noise, bird calls, and the rustling of small animals. Here, the only sounds came from our own activities and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. "It's too quiet," Scott said, verbalizing my thoughts as he stopped beside me. No birds, no monkeys, no insects, nothing. Emily overheard him. The Ami tribes reportedly avoid this island entirely. Indigenous peoples rarely abandon resource-rich environments without a significant reason. Scott asked, "Like what? Disease, natural disasters, cultural taboos?" She shrugged. "Or something they fear more than hunger." The satellite phone beeped precisely at 1900. I established a connection with Wilson's Operations Center, reporting our successful landing and camp establishment. The transmission quality was excellent, with no interference or dropped signals. Preliminary observations suggest unusual ecological conditions, I reported. Complete absence of visible wildlife and minimal evidence of a marine ecosystem. All team members are healthy, and equipment is functioning normally. Acknowledged, came the response from Wilson's assistant. Continue with established research protocols. Next check-in at 0700 tomorrow. Darkness fell quickly, as it does in the tropics. The temperature dropped 10 degrees, bringing welcome relief from the day's heat. The generator hummed quietly, powering the perimeter lights and the charging stations for our equipment. The security team established watch rotations, Thomas first, then Scott, then me for the pre-dawn hours. I gathered everyone for a brief meeting before they retired to their tents. Standard expedition protocols apply, I reminded them. No solo excursions. Maintain radio contact. Report anything unusual immediately, no matter how insignificant it might seem. David couldn't contain his enthusiasm despite the long day. Initial botanical samples show unique cellular structures. I can't identify 3 specimens in any existing database. Tomorrow we push inland to the lower slopes. Sarah was more reserved. I'll begin marine sampling at dawn. The unusual absence of visible ocean life requires investigation. Robert said nothing, staring out at the darkened water. When the meeting broke up, he lingered. "Something bothering you?" I asked. He rubbed his face with one hand. "Probably nothing. Just..." He gestured vaguely at the island. "It doesn't feel right. Places have personalities, you know. Spend enough time in the field, and you develop a sense for it. And this one feels like it's watching us." He shook his head. "Forget it. Long day, unfamiliar environment. I'll run proper geological surveys tomorrow." He walked away, his shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. I made a mental note to monitor his condition. Field expeditions often revealed psychological stress that remained hidden in normal environments. I checked the perimeter one final time before retreating to my tent. The island remained eerily silent. No wind rustled the leaves. No waves crashed against the shore. Even our generator seemed muted, as though the air absorbed sound rather than carried it. Inside my tent, I laid out my equipment for the next day. Sample bags, GPS unit, field notebook, and sidearm. I checked the satellite phone's charge and placed it within arm's reach of my sleeping bag. Standard procedure, the same as on dozens of other expeditions. Yet, as I settled in for sleep, that persistent feeling of wrongness remained. Not danger, at least not immediate danger, just the certainty that Yasur Island was fundamentally different from anywhere I'd been before. Spencer Wilson had paid $5 million for my expertise in navigating uncertain situations. As I closed my eyes, I wondered if even that sum was adequate compensation for whatever waited in the jungle beyond our camp. I woke up 15 minutes before my scheduled watch. The luminous dial on my field watch read 2:45 in the morning. Thomas would be outside, halfway through his shift. The tent fabric above me was perfectly still. There was no breeze off the water tonight. The camp generator hummed at quarter power, just enough to maintain the perimeter lighting and power essential equipment. I pulled on my boots, laced them methodically, and checked my sidearm before unzipping the tent. Thomas stood at the edge of our camp boundary, his back rigid and his head slightly cocked. It wasn't the relaxed posture of routine surveillance. Something had him on alert. All quiet, I asked, keeping my voice low. He startled, which wasn't a good sign from a man with his training. His hand moved instinctively toward his holstered weapon before recognition registered. Didn't hear you approach. His eyes returned to scanning the tree line. And no, not quiet. I listened. The waves barely whispered against the shore. There were no insects, no nocturnal birds, nothing. What did you hear? Voices. Thomas shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with his own assessment. About 20 minutes ago. Coming from there, he pointed to a section of jungle roughly 50 yards northeast of our position. What did they say? Couldn't make it out. Not English. Not any language I know. He ran a hand across the back of his neck. Sounded like multiple speakers talking over each other. Then it stopped. I checked the motion sensors. All green indicators. No perimeter breaches. You swept the area twice. Nothing. Thomas kept his eyes fixed on the trees. I've done jungle ops in Southeast Asia, Central America, the Philippines. I've heard all kinds of wildlife. This wasn't that. I nodded, neither confirming nor dismissing his assessment. We'd been on the island less than 18 hours. It was too early to draw conclusions. I'll take over. Get some rest. Thomas hesitated, reluctant to leave his post while uncertain threats remained. Military conditioning ran deep. I documented it in the log, he said finally. Time, bearing, duration. Scott's due up at 0400. He handed me the night vision monocular and walked back toward his tent. His footsteps were measured and deliberate, maintaining noise discipline even within camp. I settled into the watch position, a camp chair position to observe both the beach and the jungle's edge. The perimeter lights created a 30-yard circle of visibility around our equipment. Beyond that, darkness. Sarah emerged from her tent at 3:18, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to not disturbing others. She nodded when she saw me, then walked toward the water's edge, stopping just before the gentle surf. I watched her silhouette against the starlit ocean for 8 minutes before she returned, her face tense. "Everything all right?" I asked. I saw someone walking on the beach. Her voice was steady and clinical. Approximately 100 yards south, walking north, then gone. I stood up. "When?" "Just now. Figured it must be one of us." She glanced back at the row of occupied tents. "Everyone's accounted for." I grabbed my flashlight. "Show me." We walked the shoreline, keeping 10 feet between us and the water. Sarah pointed to the spot where she'd seen the figure. Right there, moving like this, she mimicked a casual walking pace. Not hurrying, just walking along the tide line. I swept my light across the wet sand. There were no footprints except our own leading from camp. The beam caught nothing but unbroken beach stretching into darkness. How clear was the sighting? Clear enough to see it was human-sized, walking upright. Sarah crossed her arms. Not clear enough for features or clothing details. I called out. It disappeared. I made a slow, methodical sweep with the light. Nothing disturbed the pristine sand. Could have been shadow play. Light refraction off the water. Sarah was too professional to argue, but her expression made it clear she didn't believe that explanation. Neither did I. We returned to camp. Sarah hesitated outside her tent. "This island is strange, James." She kept her voice neutral and factual. "I've worked in coastal research for 7 years. I've never seen a shore ecosystem so sterile. No tide pools, no crabs, no gulls." "Document everything," I said. "We'll compare observations in the morning." She nodded and disappeared into her tent. I returned to my post, logging her report in the field notebook with exact time and coordinates. At 3:41, the first sound came from the jungle. It wasn't voices exactly, something between a whisper and wind through leaves, except there was no wind. It lasted 12 seconds. I marked it in the log. At 3:53, it happened again, longer this time, 26 seconds. It came from a different direction, the northwest. It sounded like multiple whispers layered over each other, creating a sound that almost resolved into words, but never quite did. The camp remained still. Only the generator's low hum competed with the not-quite voices. Movement near the tents drew my attention. Scott emerged in a rush, wearing only cargo pants and barefoot, his sidearm in hand, but not raised. Proper trigger discipline, even half asleep. "Something outside my tent," he said, his voice tight. Brushed against the fabric, south side. I was already moving, flashlight in one hand and sidearm drawn but pointed down. We circled his tent. There were no footprints in the sand, no broken vegetation. The motion sensors remained green. "You sure it wasn't the wind?" I asked, knowing there wasn't any. Felt like fingers. Scott ran his hand along the tent's exterior, 3 distinct pressure points moving from here to here. He traced a path about 2 feet long across the nylon. I examined the area carefully. The sand around the tent showed only Scott's footprints from earlier. There were no animal tracks or drag marks from something moving along the ground. "Let's check the perimeter again." We walked the entire boundary of our camp, 342 feet of secured space. Nothing breached, nothing disturbed. Scott remained tense, scanning constantly. "I didn't imagine it," he said as we completed the circuit. "I know." I kept my voice matter of fact. "Log it. Include the sensory details." When Scott returned to his tent, I noticed Emily standing in the shadow of the command center, notebook in hand. She'd been observing. Collecting data? I asked. She stepped forward. 4 separate incidents in under 2 hours, all auditory or visual phenomena without physical evidence. Your assessment? Too early to tell. She tapped her pen against the notebook. Could be sleep deprivation affecting perceptual accuracy. Could be atmospheric conditions creating unusual acoustics. Could be local wildlife with unfamiliar patterns. All reasonable hypotheses. None feel right. The whispers, I said. You heard them. 3 distinct episodes. Emily's scientific precision was oddly reassuring. Varying duration, intensity, and directional origin. Consistent tonal quality. The sound came again as if summoned by our discussion, clearer this time, emanating from a point approximately 80 yards into the jungle. It almost sounded like my name, but stretched and distorted. Emily marked it in her notebook. 38 seconds, northeast bearing. I've been trained to investigate unknown variables, identify, assess, and neutralize if necessary. Standing in the perimeter light, listening to disembodied whispers, violated every operational instinct I developed. I need to check it out, I said. Emily frowned. Standard protocol is to maintain the secure perimeter until daylight. Standard protocol assumes standard conditions. I retrieved my pack from beside the command center chair, checking the flashlight, batteries, and radio. I'll stay within 50 yards of camp. Radio check every 5 minutes. Emily didn't argue further. She knew I wouldn't go beyond sensible risk parameters. I moved toward the northeast boundary, stepping through the perimeter light into darkness. The jungle wall loomed 20 yards ahead, dense and impenetrable in the night. I stopped at the edge, shining my light between massive tree trunks. The beam penetrated perhaps 15 feet before being swallowed by the vegetation. The whisper came again, closer now. My name was unmistakable this time. James. I froze, not because of the voice itself, but because I recognized it. It was a child's voice, a specific child's voice. My light caught movement between 2 trees. The small figure was partially obscured by undergrowth. I adjusted the beam, and there she stood, Clara, my daughter, 10 years old, wearing the yellow sundress from the photo on my desk at home, her hair in the same uneven pigtails she'd insisted on doing herself that morning, the morning of the accident, 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days ago. The rational part of my brain cataloged the impossibility. Clara had died on an operating table in Baltimore while I was deployed overseas. I hadn't made it back in time. Her ashes sat in an oak box on my bookshelf. These were facts. Yet there she stood, 27 feet away, partially translucent, with the foliage behind her visible through her form, but unmistakably Clara. Daddy, she said, smiling, that gap-toothed smile from 2nd grade. I've been waiting for you. My hand holding the flashlight didn't shake. My breathing remained controlled. Training takes over when the mind can't process what it's experiencing. You're not real, I said aloud. She tilted her head the way she always did when confused. I feel real. She reached toward me. Her small nothing touched the tents. But as I waited for sunrise, I removed the worn photograph from my wallet. Clara at her birthday party, cake frosting smeared across her cheek, her eyes bright with laughter. I'd carried it through 3 countries and countless missions. The island remained silent as first light touched the volcanic peak above us. Whatever waited in the jungle had said what it needed to say for now. The horizon turned from black to gray as I finished the final perimeter check. Sunrise painted the volcanic peak in burnt orange while long shadows still covered our beach camp. I'd logged 17 separate anomalies during the night. Whispers, visual distortions, and unexplained movement at the jungle's edge. 3 team members had independently reported encounters. I boiled water on the portable stove, measuring precisely 4 tablespoons of coffee into the French press. The familiar ritual helped order my thoughts. Behind me, 10 zippers rasped open one by one as the team emerged. Emily approached first, her field notebook tucked under her arm. Dark circles rimmed her eyes. She'd been awake most of the night documenting. "You look like you haven't slept," I said, pouring her a cup. "2 hours, maybe." She accepted the coffee with both hands. I cross-referenced every recorded incident and mapped the occurrence patterns. Something systematic is happening here. Thomas and Scott emerged together, moving with the deliberate precision of men forcing themselves to maintain protocols despite exhaustion. Their eyes scanned the tree line constantly. "Anything else after I went off watch?" Thomas asked. 3 more whisper incidents. No visual confirmations. I didn't mention Clara, not yet. The image of her standing between those trees remained too raw, too immediate. Sarah joined us, followed by Robert. Only David appeared well-rested, emerging for his tent with undimmed enthusiasm, already sorting sample containers in his collection kit. "Team meeting in 10 minutes, I announced. "Command tent." Full disclosure of all observations. The morning routine proceeded with mechanical efficiency, rehydrated breakfast packets, equipment checks, and basic hygiene. No one ventured beyond the perimeter alone. No one spoke about what they'd experienced during the night. At 0700 hours exactly, I placed the satellite call to Wilson's Operations Center. "Expedition Day 2 check-in," I reported. "All personnel accounted for. No injuries or equipment failures. Weather conditions stable." "Acknowledged," came the clipped response. "Any preliminary findings to report?" I paused, considering how to frame our experiences. "Several anomalous environmental observations under investigation. Nothing conclusive yet." "Understood." "Next check-in at 1900 hours." The connection terminated with the same clinical efficiency as it had been established. Inside the command tent, I arranged 7 folding chairs in a circle. The team gathered, carrying notebooks, tablets, and coffee cups. I noted their positions, Emily and Sarah sitting together, Robert slightly removed, Thomas and Scott flanking the entrance. David leaned forward, eager despite the tension. "Let's begin with facts," I said. "Last night, multiple team members experienced unexplained phenomena. I need full disclosure from everyone." Thomas went first, describing the whispers he'd heard during his watch. His account was precise, with timestamps, direction, and duration. Scott followed with the incident at his tent, demonstrating with his hand how the pressure had felt against the fabric. Sarah described the figure walking along the beach, female form, approximately 5 feet 6 inches, moving at a normal walking pace before vanishing. Emily documented everything in her notebook, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When her turn came, she produced her tablet. "I've compiled all reported incidents." She displayed a time-stamped chart. 23 separate occurrences between 2200 and 0600 hours, predominantly auditory and visual. No physical evidence remains after each event. Robert cleared his throat. "I'm going to ask the obvious question. Are we sure this isn't just sleep deprivation, An unfamiliar environment playing tricks? That was my first hypothesis, Emily replied, but the consistency of the reports and multiple independent confirmations suggest otherwise. David couldn't contain himself any longer. I think I know what's happening. He pulled out his own tablet, scrolling rapidly through botanical reference images. This morning, I found these growing just beyond our perimeter. He displayed photographs of small, pale fungi clustered at the base of a tree, taxonomically similar to psilocybe, but with structural differences. Many fungi in this family produce psychoactive compounds, specifically those that induce auditory and visual hallucinations. Emily leaned forward. That actually aligns with my historical research. She switched to a different file on her tablet. I've been comparing the limited records of this region with what we're experiencing. She turned the screen toward us. The document showed scanned pages from what appeared to be a ship's log dated 1817. Dutch trading vessel documented an indigenous tribe living here 200 years ago. They call themselves the Vadu. The tribe apparently vanished sometime between 1807 and 1825, when the next documented European contact found the island uninhabited. Thomas frowned. What happened to them? Unknown, but the Dutch records describe ritual practices involving plants the Vatu believed allowed communication with deceased ancestors. Emily scrolled to another page. The log specifically mentions tribe members speaking to those who had crossed the veil after consuming preparations from local flora. David clapped his hands together once. Exactly. The spores from these fungi could be airborne, water-soluble, or both. We're all being exposed to low doses of naturally occurring hallucinogens. Relief washed through me. A scientific explanation for what I'd seen. Not Clara, not really. Just chemical compounds interacting with memory and grief. That would explain the shared symptomatology, Emily said, and why the experiences seem more intense at night when the ambient spore concentration might increase with dropping temperatures. Robert nodded slowly. Testable hypothesis. I can collect air and soil samples and analyze them for psychoactive compounds. I've been logging environmental data since we arrived, Sarah added. The temperature drops approximately 18 degrees after sunset. Relative humidity increases by 27%. Perfect conditions for fungal activity. The conversation continued, a comfortable retreat into scientific methodology, hypotheses, testing protocols, equipment requirements, the familiar language of investigation rather than the unsettling reality of what we'd experienced. Finally, I cleared my throat. My turn. The tent fell silent. At approximately 0340, I investigated sounds at the northeast perimeter. I described moving to the jungle's edge, the whispers, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I observed what appeared to be a human figure standing 27 feet inside the... Emily paused, her pen hovering above her notebook. Did you recognize the figure? I met her gaze, then let my eyes drift around to the rest of the team. Scientific explanations were all well and good, but they deserved the complete truth from their leader. Yes, it was my daughter, Clara. She passed away 3 years ago. A heavy silence fell, stretching for what felt like an eternity, 17 seconds to be exact. I pressed on, maintaining an even tone. She appeared partially translucent, spoke my name, called me Daddy, used her exact voice. I paused, then she disappeared when I blinked. David nodded his head emphatically. Classic hallucinogenic manifestation. These compounds typically amplify existing emotional pathways, especially trauma, loss, significant memories. You've all been very forthcoming, I stated. Now I need to know, did anyone else see someone they've lost? The silence returned, this time even longer, dragging on for 23 seconds. Thomas glanced down at his hands, seemingly lost in thought. My brother, between the trees, just for a split second. Scott shook his head. Nothing like that. Just the pressure on my tent. Sarah stared intently at the ground, avoiding eye contact. I didn't see anyone specific, just the figure on the beach. Robert remained silent, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The scientific explanation had given us a foundation to work from, something concrete to grapple with. But I couldn't ignore the subtle signs of distress. Thomas's trembling hand, Robert's averted gaze, the way Sarah's knuckles had turned white as she gripped her coffee cup. Here's the plan, I announced. We establish a more substantial base camp inland, away from the beach. If David's theory about the fungi is correct, changing our location might reduce our exposure. Emily nodded in agreement. The Dutch records indicate the Vatu settlement was near the freshwater source, about half a mile inland. Higher ground, better defensive position, closer to the research sites, I added. Robert spoke up, sounding almost relieved by the shift in topic. Inland also provides better access to geological survey points. I need core samples from at least 3 elevations. We spent the next hour mapping out our inland route and organizing our equipment. The plan gave everyone a sense of purpose, something tangible to focus on instead of dwelling on the unsettling experiences of the night before. As we took a break to prepare for the move, Sarah approached me outside the command tent. James, you should see this. Her voice was still professional, but I could see the tension etched around her eyes. She led me about 20 yards south to where the edge of the jungle met the beach. 3 trees stood in a rough triangular formation. She pointed to the trunk of the largest one. Carved into the bark were symbols, not fresh cuts, but old. Each team member carried their personal gear plus 1 case of research equipment. The load distribution put 47 pounds on each person, manageable for the half-mile trek through relatively flat terrain. Before departing, I surveyed our beach camp one final time. The pristine sand, the clear water, the silence, all beautiful, all wrong. Keep visual contact at all times, I instructed the team. Radio check every 5 minutes. Report anything unusual immediately. We moved in single file toward the tree line. The jungle opened before us, massive trunks creating natural columns. 7 stone pillars, each approximately 4 feet tall, formed a wide arc across the northern edge. At the center stood a flat, altar-like slab, 8 feet long and waist high. Emily moved forward, camera already documenting. Vatu's ceremonial site. Has to be. Robert set down his equipment case, wiping sweat from his forehead. Good drainage here, elevated 6 inches above the surrounding terrain. Solid ground for a base camp. We established a perimeter 20 feet back from the nearest stone structures, setting up the command tent first, then arranging sleeping quarters in a defensive semicircle. The routine felt familiar, calming, measuring distances, securing equipment, establishing communication protocols, normal procedures in an abnormal place. 32 degrees elevation from jungle floor to clearing, Thomas reported, checking his handheld GPS freshwater source confirmed 80 yards northeast. No visible wildlife. I logged his report in the field notebook while supervising equipment placement. Sarah organized our medical supplies within easy reach of all tents. Scott established motion sensors at 15-yard intervals surrounding camp. Emily photographed and measured each stone structure, moving methodically around the clearing. "These aren't random," she called, kneeling beside one of the pillars. "They're positioned according to celestial alignment. This central stone would catch the rising sun during the summer solstice." David had already wandered to the edge of the clearing, plastic collection bags in hand. His enthusiasm contrasted sharply with our measured movements. "James, you need to see this." He gestured emphatically from the jungle's edge. I crossed to where he stood, noting the soil transition from cleared ground to forest floor, a perfect line, as if the jungle growth respected some invisible boundary. David pointed to a cluster of mushrooms growing at the base of a massive tree. They stood 4 inches tall, with pale stems and flat, almost translucent caps. Similar to what I showed you this morning, but more mature specimens. David was already pulling on latex gloves. "The structure suggests psychoactive properties, but I've never seen this specific morphology documented anywhere." "Remember your own theory," I reminded him. "These could be causing our experiences. Exactly why I need samples." He carefully extracted one mushroom, placing it in a collection vial. "If these produce compounds similar to psilocybin, but with a different molecular structure, we could be looking at an entirely new class of neurological agents." I left him to his work, returning to help complete camp setup. By 1300 hours, we had established a functional base, tent secured, communications equipment tested, solar chargers deployed to supplement generator power. The team gathered under the command canopy for lunch and task assignments. We maintained standard buddy system protocols. I instructed, spreading the topographical map across our folding table. "No one goes anywhere alone. Radio check-ins every 15 minutes when away from base." Emily had overlaid her cultural research onto the map, marking the ceremonial site and potential exploration zones. "The stone formation suggests this was the Vatu Cultural Center," she explained. "If we find additional structures, we might establish their settlement pattern." Robert studied the geological markings. "I need core samples from these 3 points to assess volcanic stability and mineral composition." Sarah pointed to the freshwater stream northeast of our position. "I'll catalog aquatic specimens there. Maybe we'll actually find something alive in the water this time." Thomas and Scott would establish an expanded security perimeter while monitoring our existing equipment. Tasks assigned, the team dispersed to their specific projects. I remained at the command center, documenting our observations and updating the expedition log. The quiet efficiency of everyone's movements belied the tension lingering from last night's experiences. We'd embraced David's scientific explanation, but I noticed how everyone's eyes still darted toward unexpected sounds. At 14:43, the scream shattered the afternoon quiet. I was running before I consciously processed the sound, following it to the northwestern edge of the clearing, where David had been collecting specimens. Thomas converged from the opposite direction, weapon drawn, but pointed safe. I cleared space around David, keeping his airway positioned while Sarah worked. The convulsions stopped abruptly. Not the gradual relaxation of successful treatment, but an immediate cessation that experienced field medics recognize instantly. Sarah's fingers pressed against David's carotid artery. 10 seconds, 20. No pulse. She immediately began chest compressions, her movements precise. Bag in my kit. Set up for intubation. I retrieved the emergency airway kit, preparing the equipment with practice motions. We'd trained for field emergencies dozens of times. The procedures were automatic, even as I registered what was happening. David was dying, had died technically. We were attempting resuscitation. Sarah continued compressions for 7 minutes. I maintained the ambo bag ventilation after she established an airway. We rotated compression duties once, administered a second epinephrine dose, applied the portable defibrillator from the emergency kit. No response. At 15:07, Sarah sat back on her heels, her face slick with sweat. Time of death, 15:07. The clearing fell silent except for our heavy breathing from the resuscitation efforts. The entire team had gathered, standing in a loose circle around David's body. No one spoke for 43 seconds. Robert broke the silence. What the hell happened? I examined the area immediately surrounding David's body. His collection tools lay where they had fallen. Several sample bags contained plant specimens. One open vial had spilled pale fungi across the ground. Don't touch anything, I ordered, pulling on gloves from Sarah's kit. Nobody touches any plant life without full protective equipment. Period. Emily knelt beside David's research journal, which had fallen open to his last entry. She carefully turned pages with a pencil eraser, not touching the paper directly. He documented collecting 7 fungi specimens, she read, structurally similar to psilocybin, but with pronounced differences in cap formation and gill pattern. Manual handling inadvisable until chemical properties confirmed. That's his last entry. I examined David's hands. The latex gloves were intact, but a small tear was visible on the right thumb. Barely a 1/4-inch rip, but enough for direct skin contact with whatever he'd handled. Rapid onset neurotoxin, Sarah concluded, packing her medical supplies with mechanical precision. Her clinical demeanor provided stability in the chaos. Absorption through the skin. Nothing in our medical kit could have countered something that aggressive. We needed to contain the situation, secure David's body, document everything, and preserve evidence. I assigned tasks with attached efficiency, falling back on protocols when emotions threatened to overwhelm rational thought. Thomas Scott, establish a perimeter around this collection area. Mark it as contaminated. Emily, document everything before we move anything. Sarah, prepare the body for transport back to the beach side. Robert stood slightly apart, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. This wasn't in the contract, he muttered. None of this was in the contract. I replied, none of this was in the contract. We constructed a stretcher from tent poles and canvas, wrapped David's body in his sleeping bag, and documented the exact location and circumstances with photographs and GPS coordinates. The procedures provided structure and purpose, better than dwelling on the fact that someone who had been excitedly collecting samples 30 minutes ago was now dead. By 1600 hours, we had transported David's body back to camp and secured it in a separate tent. The team gathered again under the command canopy, faces drawn, movements stiff. We need to notify Wilson, Emily said. I checked my watch. 3 hours until scheduled check-in. We'll report then. 3 hours? Scott's voice rose. A man just died. We need immediate extraction. And we'll request it during check-in, I replied evenly. The satellite phone is for scheduled communication unless we activate the emergency protocol, which triggers an automatic military response. We need to be precise about what we're dealing with before we make that call. The pragmatic approach steadied the group. We reviewed what we knew. David had apparently been exposed to an unknown toxin from a fungus species. The exposure occurred despite protective gloves, suggesting extreme potency. The clearness of these facts provided temporary comfort against the larger implications. I established new safety protocols. No one leaves camp alone. No specimen collection without full protective gear. Hourly radio check-ins, even within visual range of camp. The team accepted these guidelines without argument, the reality of David's death eliminating any potential resistance. At 1732, Thomas reported movement at the southwestern perimeter. Something in the trees, humanoid, about 30 yards out. Scott joined him immediately. I followed, bringing binoculars from the command tent. There, Thomas pointed toward a dense section of foliage. Between those two trunks with the vines. I raised the binoculars, adjusting the focus. Nothing but leaves and shadows. It was there, Thomas insisted, his voice containing an edge I hadn't heard before. Black hair, army jacket, my brother's jacket. I lowered the binoculars slowly. Your brother. Thomas kept staring at the spot, his body rigid. Jeff standing right there watching me. Scott exchanged a look with me. We both recognized the escalation from last night's experiences. Thomas, remember David's theory about the fungi, I said carefully. Airborne spores affecting perception. What you're seeing. I know what I'm seeing. Thomas's voice hardened. That's Jeff. Same as he looked the day before. Fallujah. He's trying to tell me something. There's nothing there, man, Scott said, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Let's get back to camp. Thomas shrugged off Scott's hand violently. Don't tell me what I see. He's right there. He raised his voice, calling toward the trees. Jeff, I'm here. I motioned for Scott to maintain. His boot prints continued up a steep incline toward a rocky outcropping. He's climbing, Scott said, pointing to disturbed moss and freshly exposed soil on the nearly vertical face. The outcropping rose approximately 40 feet, forming a small cliff face, too steep for safe ascent without proper equipment, especially in the fading light. Thomas's desperation had apparently overwhelmed his training. Thomas, I called again, louder this time. Hold position. We're coming up. No response. I estimated sunset in approximately 22 minutes. Night climbing would be suicidal on unfamiliar terrain. I'm going up, I decided, securing my sidearm and testing the first handles. Radio Emily, tell her our position and situation. Scott nodded, already making the call. I began the climb, testing each hold before committing my weight. The rock face was damp with moss and loose in places, requiring careful navigation. I counted my progress in feet. 10 of 15, 25. Halfway up, I heard Thomas's voice from above. Jeff, I'm sorry. I should have been there. I increased my pace, ignoring the burning in my forearms. Thomas, stay back from the edge. 35 feet up, I could see the top of the outcropping now, silhouetted against the darkening sky. The scream stopped me cold. Not a scream of fear or pain, but a howl of pure anguish that echoed across the jumbled canopy. Then silence. I reached the top 17 seconds later, pulling myself over the edge onto a flat rock surface approximately 10 feet wide. Thomas wasn't there. The opposite side of the outcropping dropped away sharply, a 60-foot fall to a rock-strewn gully below. I approached carefully, already knowing what I would find. Thomas's broken body lay sprawled across the rocks, limbs at unnatural angles, a dark stain spreading beneath him. Scott, I called down to where he waited at the base of the cliff. He sighed, he responded. Scott's acknowledgement came as a single word through the radio. He was already moving to circle the outcropping. I made my way back down, more careful now that urgency had been replaced with grim certainty. No one survived a fall like that. We reached Thomas's body together, approaching from different sides of the gully. The last daylight painted everything in muted reds and purples. Scott checked for a pulse out of protocol, though the catastrophic head trauma made survival impossible. "He's gone," Scott confirmed quietly. I surveyed our surroundings, marking our position on the GPS unit. "We can't move him in the dark. Too dangerous. We'll return at first light with proper equipment." Scott nodded, his professional demeanor intact, despite losing a teammate he'd worked with for years. We marked the location with a chemical light stick and began the careful journey back to camp, flashlights illuminating our path through the deepening darkness. Emily met us at the perimeter, her notebook absent for once. "Thomas is dead," I said simply. "Fell from the cliff face. We'll recover his body tomorrow." The news rippled through the remaining team members gathered at command tent. 2 deaths in less than 4 hours. Both defied easy explanation. Toxic fungi with impossible potency. A trained military contractor chasing hallucinations to his death. "It's the island," Robert said quietly, staring into his coffee cup. "This place is wrong." No one argued with him. Emily spread her research materials across the table. The Dutch records mentioned the Vatu performing rituals to communicate with their dead. What if that's what's happening to us? Not just hallucinations from fungi, but something more fundamental about this place. "That's not science," Sarah objected, though her voice lacked conviction. "Neither is what we've experienced," Emily countered. "David's theory about hallucinogenic fungi made sense this morning. Now he's dead. Thomas saw his brother and followed him off a cliff. These aren't random events." Robert sat down his cup with deliberate care. "I've been seeing my son all day." The statement landed heavily in the silence. We all turned toward him. "Just glimpses at the edge of my vision," Robert continued, staring at his hands, standing between trees, watching me from behind rocks. "Jimmy, he was 8 when the cancer took him." I thought of Clara standing in the jungle darkness. The perfect details of her face, her voice. Not random hallucination, but precise recreation of specific loss. "When's our check-in?" Scott asked, checking his watch. 1900, I confirmed. 26 minutes from now. The decision crystallized with clear, cold certainty. "We're evacuating tomorrow morning." First light. No one objected. "Tonight we secure the camp. Double the perimeter guards. No one goes anywhere alone, even to the latrines." I laid out the plan methodically. At first light, we recover Thomas's body, collect our essential equipment and samples, and return to the beach. I'll fly us out immediately. Emily gathered her research materials. "We need to document everything before we leave, the stone structures, the carvings, any evidence explaining what's happening." Agreed. "But our priority is getting off this island alive." I looked at each remaining team member in turn. The satellite call will request extraction authorization from Wilson. If he refuses, we're leaving anyway. The simplicity of the plan provided structure amid the chaos. Tasks were assigned, watch rotations established, equipment prioritized for transport. As the others dispersed to their duties, Emily remained beside me at the command table. "The Dutch records," she said quietly. "They didn't just describe the Vatu communicating with their dead. They documented the tribe's extinction. Nearly 200 people gone within 18 years of European contact. Disease? I asked. Warfare? She shook her head. The final entries described the two members walking into the jungle individually, following voices, never returning. I thought of Thomas sprinting toward his brother's ghost without hesitation or self-preservation. We leave at first light, I repeated. As night settled fully over the camp, I positioned myself at the perimeter, watching the tree line. Somewhere in that darkness, David's body lay covered in a tent, while Thomas's broken form remained on distant rocks. Morning arrived with fog clinging to the tree line. I've been awake since 4:15, checking perimeter sensors and documenting overnight incidents, 6 separate whisper events, 2 visual anomalies at the western edge, nothing that approached our defensive line. The satellite call to Wilson's operations center had gone as expected. Clinical acknowledgement of our situation, promised consultation with Wilson about extraction options, and instructions to maintain position until further orders. I'd already decided we weren't going to wait. Emily was hunched over the command table, cross-referencing her notes with the Dutch trading records. Dark circles were painted under her eyes. Anything useful? I asked, pouring coffee into her empty mug. Patterns, she replied, not even looking up. The Vadu didn't just vanish. They followed their dead into the jungle, one by one. Scott came up from his watch position, his movements tight, but his eyes were flicking around, checking the shadows between the trees. His right hand stayed close to his holstered sidearm. Perimeter secure, he reported, sounding like a robot. No movement since 0400. I noticed the slight tremor in his fingers, the shine of sweat on his face, even though the morning air was cool. Get some rest before we move out. I need you sharp. He nodded, but stayed standing at the edge of the command area, staring at something over my left shoulder. Oh, Scott. His eyes didn't move. She's here again. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned slowly, following his gaze to the empty space between 2 supply crates. There's nothing there, I said quietly. Jennifer. His voice dropped to a whisper, standing right there, watching me. I stepped closer, moving slowly and deliberately. Who's Jennifer? A tear ran down his rough cheek. Kandahar. 2 years ago, she was our translator. 19 years old. His hand went towards his weapon. I told her the route was clear. Emily slowly closed her notebook, watching us with laser focus. Oh, Scott. I kept my voice calm. Remember what we talked about the island. What you're seeing isn't real. She looks real. His eyes followed something I couldn't see. Blood on her hijab. Same as when the IED. He choked on the words. I promised her family she'd be safe. I moved so I was between Scott and his hallucination. Focus on me. We're evacuating soon. I need you present. For 3 seconds, his eyes locked with mine. Then they slid away again, widening with fresh terror. No, Jen, don't show me that, please. His breathing sped up. I know it was my fault. I know. I keyed my radio. Sarah, medical assistance at the command tent. Now. Scott's hand closed around the grip of his sidearm. I measured the distance between us. 7 feet. Too far to do anything safely if he pulled his weapon. Scott, listen to me. I need you to move away from your weapon. He didn't seem to hear me. I'm sorry, Yen. I'm so sorry. Tears were streaming down his face now. I should have checked the route myself. I should have been in that vehicle. Sarah showed up at the tent entrance, her medical kit in her hand. I signaled her to wait. Tell me about Jennifer, I said, taking a slow, careful step forward. What was she like? The question seemed to get through to him for a moment. Scott blinked, looked at me again. Smart, spoke 4 languages, wanted to study in America after her contract. She sounds remarkable. She was. His hand relaxed a little on his weapon. She trusted me. I took another step. 5 feet now. The island is using your grief, Scott. Whatever you're seeing isn't Jennifer. It's something else wearing her face. His eyes darted back to the empty space. She's crying now, says I abandoned her. You didn't abandon her. You're honoring her by surviving. 4 feet between us, almost close enough to grab his weapon if I had to. Step away from the hallucination. Her hands were shaking a little, but her voice was steady. Did he say who Jennifer was? Translator in Afghanistan, killed by an IED on his watch. I looked around the camp, taking in everything. Robert had picked up Scott's weapon and cleared the chamber. Sarah was kneeling beside the body, checking for vital signs she knew weren't there. He blamed himself. Emily lowered her camera. David, Thomas, now Scott, all followed or confronted visions of people they'd lost. Guilt, Robert said quietly from across the clearing. That's the common factor. Not just grief, but guilt. I nodded slowly. Emily went back to her notes, flipping through the pages faster and faster. The Dutch records. The captain wrote that the Vatu believed the island itself was alive, not just spiritually, but literally sentient. She found the page she was looking for. Here, the elders talk about the island as hungry. It consumes shame and regret, feeds on the guilt of men. Robert put Scott's weapon on the command table, moving very carefully. That's not possible. 3 dead men suggest otherwise, Sarah said, closing her kit. I checked my watch. We need to move now. Get only what you can carry. We leave for the beach in 15 minutes. The evacuation plan snapped everyone back to attention. Grief would have to wait. After we survived, Emily packed up her research materials and camera equipment. Sarah gathered the medical supplies. I transferred the essential navigation tools and communication gear to my pack. Robert was working next to me, securing water containers and emergency rations. He was moving like a machine, but his eyes kept drifting towards the jungle edge. You doing okay? I asked quietly. He nodded, not looking at me. Au fine, Robert. He stopped, his hands resting on the supply case. I keep seeing Jimmy, my son. The confession hung in the air between us. How long has he been appearing? I kept my voice neutral, professional. Since yesterday afternoon, just glimpses. Robert's knuckles were white against the plastic case. Standing between the trees, watching me from the edge of the clearing, I thought about Clara in the darkness, the perfect details of her face. You said he died of cancer. Leukemia, 8 years old. Robert finally met my eyes. I never told anyone the rest of it. Emily had stopped packing, listening while pretending not to. You don't have to tell us now, I said. Maybe I do. Robert's voice dropped lower. The first symptoms showed up 6 months before the diagnosis. Bruising, fatigue. I thought he was just being lazy. Told him to toughen up. His eyes started to shine. By the time we got him to a specialist, the cancer was everywhere. I recognize the pattern now. The guilt, the shame, the perfect target for whatever was hunting us. It wasn't your fault, Emily said quietly. You couldn't have known. A better father would have. Robert's attention shifted to something behind me. His expression softened. He's standing right there, wearing his baseball uniform. I turned, seeing only empty space. Robert, listen to me. What you're seeing isn't your son. It's using his memory against you. He looks so real. Robert's voice sounded far away. He's smiling. Wants to show me something by the stones. Sarah finished packing the medical supplies. We need to leave now. I moved so I was standing right in front of Robert, blocking his view. Focus on me. We're evacuating. I need you with us. For 2 seconds, he seemed like he was really seeing me. We kept a sustainable pace through the thickening jungle. 4 miles to the beach, approximately 2 hours at normal hiking speed. But nothing about this was normal. The whispers started 23 minutes into our march. Distant at first, then closer. Familiar voices calling from between the trees. I checked my watch. 8:15 in the morning, full daylight, which should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Keep moving, I told Emily and Sarah, eyes forward. Focus on the trail. The undergrowth grew denser as we went down from the plateau. Broad-leaved plants slapped against our legs. Fallen logs made obstacles that we had to climb over or go around. I tracked our progress using the GPS unit, marking each quarter mile with quiet announcements to keep a sense of measured progress. Stay 5 feet apart, I instructed, close enough to help each other, far enough not to get tangled up if someone falls. Emily was limping a little, but she kept up the pace, her backpack full of research materials and camera equipment. Sarah followed 15 feet behind us, moving like a robot. She hadn't said a word since we left camp. 1 mile down, I announced at 8:47, maintaining course southeast. The whispers were getting louder, a child's laughter from my left, a man's voice calling Sarah's name from the right. I ignored them, focusing on the trail markers I'd made when we came in. They're getting louder, Emily said, her voice tight with fear. It's not real, I reminded her. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, it's the island using memories against us. Behind us, Sarah stumbled over a root sticking out of the ground. When I turned to check on her, she was staring into the dense foliage to our west. Sarah, eyes forward, I called. She didn't respond. Her head tilted slightly, listening to something only she could hear. I went back the 7 steps to reach her. Sarah, we need to keep moving. Do you hear that? She asked, still staring into the jungle. Don't engage with it, I said firmly. Remember what happened to the others. She blinked, looked at my face for a moment. Right. Sorry. We kept going. The path narrowed as we went into an area of twisted vines and thorny bushes. I used my machete to clear the worst sections, moving carefully to save energy while keeping us moving forward. At 9:22, Emily caught her boot on a hidden root and pitched forward. I caught her arm before she hit the ground, but her ankle twisted under her. She gasped in pain. How bad? I asked, helping her to a fallen log. Emily rotated her ankle carefully, wincing. Not broken, sprain, maybe. She pushed herself up, putting weight on it. I can walk. Her face went pale when she put full pressure on it, but she didn't complain. I noticed the swelling already showing above her boot top. We'll slow our pace, I decided. Better to reach the beach in one piece than risk further injury. Sarah had stopped 10 feet behind us, staring at a gap between 2 huge banyan trees. Her posture had changed. Head cocked to one side, body leaning forward slightly. I hear splashing, she said, her voice sounding strange and distant. I moved to her side right away. Sarah, focus on me. She didn't turn. That's Maggie at the lake. Emily and I exchanged a look. Sarah had mentioned a sister who drowned. Sarah? I spoke firmly, standing right in front of her. What you're hearing isn't real. The island is using your memories. It sounds just like her. Sarah's eyes were wide, seeing something beyond the jungle around us. She's calling for help. I grabbed her arm. We need to keep moving. The beach is 4 miles ahead. She pulled away with surprising strength. You don't understand. She's in the water. Her voice broke. She's drowning again. Emily limped closer, her research instinct stronger than her fear. Sarah, you told us your sister's death was an accident, that you didn't blame yourself. Sarah laughed, a hollow, broken sound. What else would I say? That I was supposed to be watching her? That I was on the phone with my boyfriend instead of paying attention? Her eyes were fixed on the space between the trees. I heard her call for help. I just didn't react fast enough. I recognized the pattern, just like with the others. The confession, the justification, the surrender to guilt. Sarah listened to me. I kept my voice calm, in control. What you're seeing isn't your sister. It's using her memory to trap you. She's right there. Sarah's expression softened, like she was in awe. 16 years old, just like the day at the lake. She took a step toward the trees. She's saying she forgives me. Emily tried a different approach. What does the scientific data tell you, Sarah? There's no lake here, no physical presence. You're experiencing a hallucination triggered by environmental factors. For a moment, Sarah's professional training seemed to break through. She blinked rapidly, focusing on Emily's face. Hallucination, she repeated. Right. Toxic exposure, fungal spores. Exactly. I eased my grip on her arm. We need to reach the beach. Get off this island. Sarah nodded, then froze. Her eyes widened, filled with terror. No, Maggie, grab my hand. She lunged forward, breaking free. I can save you this time. Sarah stopped. I lunged after her, but she was already sprinting between the banyan trees. She's going under, Sarah screamed, crashing through the underbrush. I followed, using the machete to cut a path through the vines and branches. Emily called from behind, her injured ankle keeping her from keeping up. I caught a glimpse of Sarah 20 yards ahead, running with the desperate speed of someone trying to stop a tragedy. Sarah, I shouted. There's no water. There's no lake. Either she didn't hear me or she didn't care. The jungle thickened around us, forcing me to slow down to avoid getting hurt. I lost sight of her for 17 seconds, following only the sound of breaking branches and her increasingly frantic cries. When I burst into a small clearing, Sarah was standing in the center, arms reaching out towards nothing. Her face showed pure anguish. I can't reach you, she sobbed. Maggie, please. I moved carefully, watching every step. Sarah, take my hand. We're going to walk back to the trail together. She didn't even acknowledge me. Her body suddenly stiffened, her head tilting as if she was listening. Yes, she whispered. I understand now. Warning bells went off in my head, the same phrase Thomas had used before he fell. Sarah. She turned towards me, tears running down her face. She needs me to come to her. I have to go into the water. There is no water, I said firmly, reaching for her arm again. She twisted away, moving faster than I expected. You don't see it, but I do. The lake. It's right there. She pointed to the empty air. Maggie's waiting for me. Before I could stop her, Sarah bolted across the clearing towards a mess of vines and roots at the edge. I chased after her immediately, but she had a 7-yard head start. She reached the edge and disappeared, like the jungle had swallowed her whole. One moment she was there, the next gone. I reached the spot where Sarah had been 4 seconds later. All I found was a sheer drop, a natural sinkhole about 40 feet deep, with jagged rocks at the bottom. The plants had hidden the edge completely. Sarah was lying still at the bottom, her body twisted at unnatural angles across the rocks. Even from up here, I could see how bad the injuries were. No one could survive a fall like that. Sarah, Emily's voice called from behind me. She limped into the clearing, breathing hard. I turned, blocking her view of the sinkhole. She's gone. Emily knew what had happened as soon as she saw my face. How? Hidden drop. She ran straight into it. I glanced back at the deadly pit. At least it was quick. Emily's professional distance cracked a little. We're the only ones left. I checked my GPS unit. 4 miles to the beach. We need to keep moving. We can't just leave her there. Emily was staring past me at the sinkhole. We have no equipment to get her out. No time. I made the call, trying to stay detached. We'll mark the coordinates. Reported during extraction. Emily's face showed the conflict between what she felt and what she had to do. Finally, she nodded. Let me at least take some pictures of the site. I gave her 30 seconds to document it. Emily photographed the sinkhole and the area around it, logging the exact coordinates in her notebook like a machine. Her hands were shaking a little, but she moved very carefully. We stay on the main trail, I said when she was done. No going off course, no matter what we hear or see. Emily adjusted her pack, wincing as she put weight on her injured ankle. The island's closing in on us. It knows we're trying to escape. I didn't argue. The whispers had gotten louder since Sarah died. Voices calling from everywhere. Movement glimpsed between the trees that vanished when we looked right at it. We kept going, even with Emily's injury. I offered my shoulder to help her on the steeper parts, tracking our pace against the distance left on the GPS. The afternoon light was coming through the trees at a sharper angle, making the shadows longer. At 4:37, I saw a break in the trees ahead. The tree line should be just beyond it. Emily's face showed relief, mixed with exhaustion. We're going to make it. I didn't say it out loud. 5 people had died thinking the same thing. The whispers got stronger as we got closer to the edge of the jungle. Not just whispers now. Clear voices speaking right behind the trees, from the shadows between the roots. Daddy, why are you leaving me here alone? Clara's voice, the same way she sounded when she was afraid of the dark. I kept walking. You promised you'd never leave me again. Her voice cracked. You promised after the divorce you'd always be there. 10 more yards to the tree line. I focused on Emily's heavy breathing next to me, on the fact that we were still moving forward. Dr. Johnson, a man's voice now, talking to Emily. Another disappointment. I expected better from you. Emily stumbled a little. Her face went pale. Your father? I asked, not stopping. She nodded, her jaw tight. Don't listen, I told her. Keep moving. 7 yards to the clearing. The voices got louder and louder, all at once. Sarah calling for help from behind us. Thomas asking why we left them on the rocks. Robert accusing us of leaving him at the stone circle. The price of failure was always too high for you, wasn't it? The man's voice got louder, talking right to Emily. Never quite good enough for the Johnson name. Emily slowed down. He died disappointed in me, she whispered. Changed his will a week before the stroke. Coming out completely. Emily, I gripped her arm tightly. The island is using that against you. Don't engage. 5 yards from the tree line. Through gaps in the trees, I could see the beach. The Cessna was still there, tied to the shore. The voices were everywhere, not just sounds anymore. See-through figures were showing up between the trees. Clara stepped right in front of us, her yellow sundress bright against the dark jungle. Her face, which had been innocent and pleading, twisted into something evil. Her eyes turned black. Her smile stretched too wide. Stay with me forever, Daddy, she said, her voice changing into multiple tones. Everyone else did. I walked through her, feeling a cold pressure like walking through freezing mist. Clara's image disappeared, then came back behind us. You can't leave, she said, her voice no longer just hers, but a mix of many. The island needs you. Emily gasped next to me. I turned and saw her staring at an old man in academic robes standing in front of us. His face showed disappointment and anger. Running away again, Emily? The figure asked. Just like you ran from real scholarship, from your responsibilities to the family legacy. Emily stopped walking. Dad, I don't answer it, I warned, pulling her forward. It's not him. The figure's features changed a little, becoming thin, almost like a skull under see-through skin. You know why I changed the will, it said. You were never worthy of the Johnson name. Emily's breathing sped up, her eyes fixed on the figure, filled with old pain. I did everything you asked, she whispered. It was never enough. I stood between Emily and the figure. Look at me. Not at that thing. Her eyes finally met mine. The others died because they couldn't tell the difference between memory and what the island was making them see, I said firmly. Whatever you feel about your father, the island is using it as a weapon. The beach was just 3 yards ahead. The sunset was painting the ocean with oranges and purples. Night would be here in 30 minutes. Emily was listening to me. I gripped her shoulders. The key is honesty, not pretending it's not there. Face your pain. Don't hide from it. Her father's figure was circling us, moving stiffly and strangely. Stay with me, Emily. We have so much to talk about how you failed. Understanding came into her eyes. The guilt feeds it, she whispered. The buried hurt. Exactly. I nodded towards the beach. 3 more yards. Talk to me about your father while we walk. Emily took a deep breath. He was brilliant, hard to please. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Each word seemed to cause her pain. When I chose anthropology instead of running the university, he said I was a disappointment to the Johnson family. We took 1 step forward. The figure yelled with anger, its shape changing wildly. He died before we could make peace. Emily kept going, her voice getting stronger. Changed his will, left everything to the university instead of me. His final judgment, another step. The figures multiplied around us. Clara, Sarah's sister, Thomas's brother, all with twisted faces under their familiar faces. Keep talking. I encouraged as we got closer to the tree line. Say the truth. I was angry when he died. Emily's voice broke. Relieved, even then guilty for feeling relieved. Tears were running down her face. I've carried that around for 7 years. We broke through onto the beach. The figures stayed at the tree line, hissing and changing shape, but not coming onto the sand. I couldn't save him from the stroke, Emily said, her voice steadying. Just like you couldn't save Clara, but I can't accept that now. The sun was touching the horizon as we walked across the beach towards the Cessna. The figures were walking along the tree line, keeping pace with us but not coming onto the beach. Almost there, I said, helping Emily through the shallows towards the plane. Can you get up the ladder? She nodded, holding back the pain in her ankle. I climbed in first, then helped her into the plane. The cockpit felt safe for a moment. Instruments, controls, mechanical things instead of ghosts. I closed the door and started the pre-flight checks. Enough fuel. Control surfaces working. Started the engine. Outside, darkness was falling fast. The figures were coming to the water's edge, clearer now, surrounding the plane. I saw Clara in front, her face innocent again, asking me to come back. Don't look at them, I told Emily, who was strapping herself into the co-pilot's seat. The engine coughed, then started. I let go of the mooring line and started to take off, guiding the Cessna away from the shore into deeper water. The figures came into the water, moving fast, reaching for the pontoons as I gave it more throttle. Clara's face was pressed against my side. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the din of the engine. Goodbye, Clara, I whispered. I love you. I always will. For a fleeting moment, her image wavered, snapping back to the true memory of my daughter, innocent, beautiful, untouched by the island's corruption. The Cessna picked up speed, skimming across the darkening lagoon. The spectral hands vanished from the pontoons. The plane shuddered once, then lifted off the water, climbing into the night sky. Emily sat silently beside me, her face bathed in the soft glow of the instrument panel lights. After several minutes at cruising altitude, she finally spoke. They were all real, weren't they? The things we saw, not just hallucinations. I adjusted our course for Fiji. Something on that island found the rawest wounds in each of us and used them as weapons. 5 people dead. Emily's voice was flat, clinical, despite her obvious exhaustion. Because they couldn't face their guilt, or because they faced it the wrong way, I countered. Alone in denial, the island fed on that. Emily opened her research notebook and started scribbling notes. Even now, Wilson will demand explanations, evidence. Wilson will want what he always wants, I replied wearily. Results, profit, control. The night stretched out before us, 3 hours of darkness over open ocean before we reached Fiji. Eventually, Emily's head lolled against the window as exhaustion took over. I remained vigilant, scanning the instruments, monitoring fuel consumption, calculating our estimated time of arrival. Clara didn't reappear in the darkness beside me. Whatever connection the island had forged couldn't reach this far. Or maybe, just maybe, by finally speaking my truth aloud, I'd broken its hold on me completely. The Cessna's engine hummed steadily as we left Yasur Island shrinking behind us. 5 colleagues remained there forever, 5 people who couldn't outrun their pasts. I watched the soft glow of the instrument panel and started planning what I would tell Spencer Wilson about his failed expedition, about what his money had bought on an island that thrived on human pain. Dawn crept across the Pacific, unveiling the world in gradual increments of visibility. First, a faint shimmering along the eastern horizon, then spreading fingers of pale orange painting the cloud banks. The Cessna's fuel gauge showed 17%, enough for another hour of flight if we had to push it. But we wouldn't need it. Fiji's main island materialized through the morning haze, the coastline gradually solidifying against the water. Emily had passed out about 4 hours earlier, slumped against the passenger window. Exhaustion, dehydration, and shock had finally claimed her after a good half-hour of fitful attempts at sleep. Her ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, the bootlaces straining against the pressure. Her breathing remained shallow but steady. I radioed ahead to Nadi's private aviation sector, requesting medical assistance on arrival. The controller's voice crackled back with confirmation. Morning light glinted off the runway as I lined up the Cessna's floats with a water landing channel adjacent to the main airstrip. The seaplane settled onto the water with a series of gentle bumps, the transition from air to surface barely registering in my arms. Muscle memory guided the controls. A harbor guide in a small boat directed us toward the private dock, where two figures in medical uniforms waited beside a stretcher. I shut down the engine and sat motionless for what felt like an eternity, maybe 27 seconds. My hands remained locked on the controls. 5 people dead, 2 survivors. Nothing in the cargo hold but Emily's incomplete research notes and a few sealed botanical samples David had collected before he died. Emily stirred beside me as the plane bumped gently against the dock. "We made it," she mumbled, her eyes struggling to focus. "We made it," I confirmed. "Medical team waiting. Your ankle needs attention." She nodded weakly. "Wilson, not yet. I released my harness. Let's get you taken care of first." The medical team boarded as I opened the cabin door. Their movements were efficient, practiced. They immobilized Emily's ankle, transferred her to the stretcher, and began a rapid assessment of her vital signs. The younger medic, a Fijian woman with quick, intelligent eyes, glanced at me. "You require medical attention as well, sir." I took stock of my condition: dehydration, fatigue, minor cuts and scrapes across my hands and forearms from the jungle vegetation. Nothing that required immediate intervention. "I'm functional. Focus on her." The harbor master approached to the clipboard, his weathered face etched with professional concern. "Your aircraft needs refueling, sir." "Later," I said, nodding toward the plane. "Security watch until I return. No one accesses the cargo." He made a note on his clipboard. "Customs officials will need to contact Spencer Wilson's office. All arrangements pre-cleared through diplomatic channels." I handed him the expedition documentation for my waterproof pack. "I need transportation to Nadi General Hospital." 37 minutes later, I sat in a molded plastic chair in the hospital's waiting area. The antiseptic smell mingled with the lingering jungle scent still clinging to my clothing. I'd washed my face and hands in the restroom, creating pink-tinged water in the basin from dried blood and dirt. My reflection showed 3 days of stubble growth and eyes that had seen far too much. I plugged Wilson's satellite phone into a wall outlet and waited for it to power up. 7 missed calls from his operations center, 2 text messages demanding immediate status updates. No condolence messages for the dead. The attending physician, a tall Indian woman with steel-framed glasses, approached with a tablet in hand. "Miss Johnson is stable. Moderate ankle sprain, significant dehydration and exhaustion. We've administered fluids and pain management. She'll need 24 hours of observation minimum." "May I see her briefly?" "She's requested to speak with you." Emily lay propped up in a hospital bed, and 4-line running into her left arm. Her face had regained some color, her ankle elevated on a pillow wrapped in compression bandages. "You look terrible," she said when I entered. "Standard operating condition. I took the chair beside her bed. Doctor says you'll recover. She nodded toward the satellite phone in my hand. Have you called him yet? Next on the list. Emily's fingers twisted in the thin hospital blanket. He won't believe us. I know. David's samples might help convince him. The fungi showed unusual properties, even in preliminary testing. If we could, Emily, I kept my voice gentle but firm. 5 people are dead. Whatever Wilson wanted from that island, the price was far too high. She closed her eyes briefly. I keep seeing them. Thomas jumping. Scott with the gun. Robert at the stones. Her clinical tone wavered slightly. Sarah running into nothing. I didn't offer empty reassurances. We both knew those images would likely persist. Get some rest, I said, standing up. I'll handle Wilson. James. She caught my wrist with surprising strength. When you tell him, remember what the island taught us. The truth matters. Even the parts we don't want to face. I nodded once and left her to recover. The hospital provided a private consultation room for the call. Glass walls, a small table, 2 chairs. I closed the door and dialed Wilson's direct number from the satellite phone. He answered on the second ring. Rodriguez, status report. His voice carried the same controlled impatience I'd heard in his office, as if this were just another routine business check-in. The expedition failed. I kept my tone neutral, factual. 5 team members dead. Minimal samples recovered. Complete withdrawal from Yasur Island necessary. 11 seconds of silence followed. Explain. The single word carried dangerous undercurrents. I provided the sequence of events chronologically, without embellishment. David's death from fungal toxin contact, Thomas pursuing his brother's apparition to a fatal fall, Scott's suicide after hallucinating his dead translator, Robert's death at the stone circle, Sarah's run into the hidden sinkhole. Wilson listened without interruption. When I finished, the silence stretched to 17 seconds. So you're telling me, he finally said, each word precisely measured, that my $50 million expedition failed because the island showed people ghost stories. The island manifested traumatic memories, specifically deceased individuals for whom team members carried unresolved guilt. The veneer of control finally slipped. You experienced mass hallucinations from environmental toxins. David identified fungal specimens with psychoactive properties. That explains everything. It doesn't explain the Vatu tribe's complete disappearance, or why local populations refuse to approach the island, or why 5 rational people with military and scientific training all experienced identical phenomena. Wilson's voice hardened. I expected better from you, Rodriguez. Professional assessment, proper risk management. Instead, you lost my entire team and abandoned millions in equipment based on hallucinations. The seaplane is intact. Emily survived with research notes. Some botanical samples were recovered. Worthless fragments. His dismissal was absolute. I needed comprehensive ecological surveys, geological assessments, marine life studies, specific botanical specimens David was instructed to locate. There it was, the specific instruction I'd suspected from the beginning. What exactly was David looking for? Wilson ignored the question. Your contract specified team safety as your primary responsibility. 5 dead suggests catastrophic negligence on your part. The deaths weren't preventable once we understood what we faced. I kept my voice level despite the accusation. The island targets specific psychological vulnerabilities, exploits buried trauma. Save it for your therapist, Wilson snapped. My legal team will review your contract for breach provisions. You'll be hearing from them regarding recovery of advanced payment and potential liability for equipment abandonment. I had expected this reaction. Wilson's type always sought someone to blame when outcomes didn't align with expectations. Your threats don't concern me. I stated it as simple fact. What concerns me is why you sent us to an island that indigenous populations have avoided for centuries without disclosing its true nature. I disclosed everything relevant in the briefing materials. You mentioned superstitions, not targeted supernatural phenomena that could identify and exploit psychological vulnerabilities. Wilson's laugh held no humor. Listen to yourself, Rodriguez, supernatural phenomena. You experienced toxic exposure combined. Dr. Johnson signed comprehensive confidentiality agreements regarding all observations and discoveries. Publication without my express written approval constitutes breach of contract with significant financial penalties. She's aware of the agreements. I kept my tone neutral. She's also aware that 5 people died because you withheld critical information about Yasur Island's nature. I withheld nothing. You failed in basic safety protocols and now seek supernatural explanations to absolve her negligence. I recognized the conversation had reached its inevitable conclusion. Wilson would never acknowledge what we'd encountered. His worldview had no framework for experiences that couldn't be quantified, monetized, or controlled. For the record, I said, what was David specifically instructed to find? The question hung between us for 12 seconds. That information remains proprietary. Wilson's voice regained its business-like efficiency. A courier will collect the satellite phone and any recovered samples within 3 hours. Have everything ready for transfer. The samples stay with Emily until proper scientific documentation is complete. Wilson's laugh held genuine amusement this time. You think you have leverage here. I own the samples, the equipment, the research, and contractually any intellectual property derived from the expedition. You don't own the truth about what happened. The truth, Wilson said with finality, is whatever narrative prevails. 5 dead from environmental toxin exposure, and poor leadership creates a compelling legal narrative against you, Rodriguez. Remember that before you and Dr. Johnson decide to promote alternative theories. The line went dead. I sat in the consultation room for 6 minutes, watching Fiji and the hospital staff move efficiently through their routines beyond the glass walls. Normal people, normal lives. No whispers following them through the corridors. Emily was asleep when I returned to her room. Her research notebook lay open on the bedside table, pages filled with her precise handwriting, diagrams of the stone circle, notes about the Vatu tribe, documented timestamps of each manifestation we'd witnessed. I left her to rest and walked outside to the hospital's small courtyard garden. The morning had advanced to full brightness, sunlight warming the stone benches where visitors sat with patients. I found an empty spot beneath a flowering tree and called my bank to transfer $50,000 to Emily's account, enough to cover immediate expenses and secure legal representation if Wilson pursued his threats. A nurse approached after I completed the call. Dr. Johnson is awake and asking for you, sir. Emily had managed to sit up straighter in bed. Color had returned to her face, and a spark of determination shone in her eyes. Wilson threatened legal action? She asked without preamble. As expected, I took the chair beside her. Confidentiality agreements, intellectual property claims, standard intimidation tactics. She nodded. I've been documenting everything while it's fresh. The pattern is remarkable, James. The island doesn't just create hallucinations. It identifies specific emotional wounds and exploits them through increasingly sophisticated manifestations. Wilson won't acknowledge any of it. Claims environmental toxins and group hysteria. Of course he does. Emily's voice held no surprise. Men like Wilson can't integrate experiences that challenge their fundamental worldview, especially when those experiences interfere with profit potential. I indicated her notebook. What will you do with your research? Publish, regardless of threats. Her jaw set in a determined line. 5 people died. Others need to know why. Wilson mentioned specific instructions to David, something he was meant to find. Emily frowned. David was unusually focused on certain plant species. Said they showed promise for neurological applications before we even landed. She leafed through her notebook. Here, he mentioned compounds that might affect memory formation and emotional processing. Wilson's company has a pharmaceutical division specializing in cognitive enhancement drugs. The connection clicked into place. Wilson wasn't after real estate or a resort property. He wanted compounds that could manipulate emotional responses from an island that feeds on emotional trauma. Emily's voice held grim irony. The perfect research environment. I stood, needing to move. I've arranged financial support while you recover, enough to retain legal counsel if Wilson pursues his threats. Thank you. She studied me with analytical precision. What will you do now? I hadn't fully formed that answer until she asked. Complete my recovery report, document everything factually, then find somewhere quiet for a while. Running away. Her question held no judgment, only curiosity. The opposite. I moved to the window, watching normal life continue in the courtyard below. For 3 years, I've been outrunning Clara's memory, taking the most remote contracts, the most dangerous extractions, keeping busy enough that grief couldn't catch me. Emily nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. The island showed me what happens when we bury trauma instead of facing it. I continued. 5 people died because they couldn't confront their guilt. I don't intend to make that mistake again. Where will you go? Colorado. The decision formed as I spoke it. Clara's mother still lives there. I haven't visited the grave since the funeral. Emily made a note in her book. The island targets unresolved trauma. Those who acknowledge their grief survived. Write that in your paper, I said. It might save lives. I left Emily to her documentation and returned to the airstrip where the Cessna floated tethered to the dock. The harbor master had posted a security guard as requested. I nodded my thanks and began a systematic inventory of the remaining equipment. David's specimen case contained 16 seal vials with plant and fungal samples. Emily's research materials filled 2 waterproof cases. The rest, camping equipment, communications gear, scientific instruments, remained on Yasur Island with the bodies of 5 people who couldn't escape their pasts. I secured the samples and research materials in my personal pack. Wilson's courier would arrive empty-handed. Whatever legal battles followed would be fought on ground of our choosing, not his. The afternoon sun beat down on the dock as I completed the inventory. Heat rippled off the Cessna's metal surfaces, normal physical reality. No whispers, no aparitions. Just a man with a clipboard documenting what remained after catastrophic failure. 5 lives lost, seeking something that should have remained undisturbed. 1 survivor with research that might prevent future expeditions from making the same mistake, and myself, neither fully broken nor fully healed, but finally willing to face what I had buried for 3 years. Clara wouldn't appear again in the corners of my vision, not because the grief had vanished, but because I had finally accepted it as part of myself rather than something to outrun. The island had taught that lesson with brutal efficiency. I signed the final inventory page and handed it to the harbor master. The Cessna would remain in Fiji until ownership disputes were resolved. I had no need for it anymore. My next journey required different transportation, a commercial flight to Denver, then a rental car to the small mountain cemetery where a yellow sundress had been folded into a child-sized casket 3 years, 4 months, and 22 days ago. It was time to visit my daughter properly, without fear of what saying goodbye might unleash. Yasur Island had shown the deadly cost of hiding from grief. I would not pay that price again.